Good evening. Are you tired, as I am, of documentaries about nature rooted in naturalistic, atheistic, materialistic Darwinism, like those that come from National Geographic or Britain's Sir David Attenborough? Are you longing to see nature presented as the Bible describes it, a grand revelation of the glory, the wisdom, the power of God? Well, tonight I'll discuss a new documentary that does just that with its narrator, biologist Dr. Gordon Wilson, whose The Riot and the Dance is a stunningly beautiful, biblically faithful look at the created world, viewing birds and reptiles, big cats and elephant seals, and more from the Pacific Northwest's coast to Sri Lanka's rainforests to Arizona's deserts. Stick with me as Gordon Wilson and I talk through these things. Uh, we will have him on in just a moment. First, I'd like to just introduce you to the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation in case you are new to us. I hope many of you are. The Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation, which is your host for this program, is a Christian ministry, a network of just under 70 evangelical Christian scholars. About a third are natural scientists, about a third are economists, and about a third are theologians, philosophers, ethicists, and pastoral leaders. The scientists tend, most of them, to specialize in either, excuse me, either environmental science or ecology. We have scientists, some of the world's top ones are with us. We have biologists, geologists, not paleontologists, well, actually we do, but solar physicists and more with us. The economists tend to specialize in the economics of the environment, how we apply the insights of economics to environmental stewardship, or the economics of development, that is, figuring out what things are necessary to lift and keep whole societies out of poverty. And then the theologians and philosophers and ethicists tend to want to specialize in the theology, the ethics, the worldview of environmental stewardship and of poverty relief and economics. And our vision is of a world that is transformed by people obeying the biblical instructions on how we are supposed to fulfill the dominion mandate of Genesis 1:28, where God, having created Adam and Eve, male and female, after his own image and in his likeness, blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and everything that moves on the face of the earth." The very sorts of things that Dr. Gordon Wilson so enjoys studying himself, going out and actually catching them and looking closely at them, studying them, and then letting them go and be free. He is a good steward of these things. We define this dominion, or what we call biblical earth stewardship, as men and women created by God working lovingly together to enhance the fruitfulness, the beauty, and the safety of the earth to the glory of God and the benefits of our neighbors. So that we're trying to address the two great commandments, to love God and to love neighbor. And we realize that if people are going to do this, they need to learn to think about the world the way God intends us to think about it. Part of the steps toward doing that is to be reconciled to God, because all of us from birth on, even before birth on, are fallen sinners. We are not by nature children of God. We are by nature, as Paul puts it in Ephesians chapter 2, children of wrath and alienated from God. And we are rebels by nature. We need new hearts, and we can only have those by the gracious work of God, by his Holy Spirit working in us through the gospel. And it is through the gospel, the good news that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried, that he rose again on the third day according to the scriptures, This is the power of God for salvation for everyone who believes. So, by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone, we sinners, people like me, can be reconciled to the Holy God and then learn to think His thoughts after Him and to handle His world the way He wants us to handle it. This is kind of the mission of the Cornwall Alliance, to educate the public and policymakers on biblical earth stewardship, economic development for the very poor around the world, and the gospel of Jesus Christ, together with the worldview, the theology, and the ethics that always come with it. So, thank you very much for tuning in tonight with us. I would encourage you to go to the Cornwall Alliance's website. That's cornwallalliance.org, and sign up for our email newsletter. It comes out a couple times each week, sometimes 3 times. It's always educational. Explore our site, go to the blog. We have new articles pretty much every day. Always fascinating educational articles. And every month we select a particular educational tool that we want to pass along as our way of saying thank you when people donate literally any amount. Doesn't matter how great or how small that amount is. And for the month of December, we are offering to send you a copy of the DVD of The Riot and the Dance Earth, which is the topic of our discussion this evening. And to request your copy, simply go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button, and as you fill out the donation form online, when you come to the comments field, simply write in promo code 21-12, that's promo code 21-12, or the title, The Riot and the Dance, and we will be glad to send you a free copy of this DVD. 100% of your donation will be tax deductible. Well, again, thank you so much for tuning in with us this evening. And it's my pleasure now to bring on our special guest tonight, Dr. Gordon Wilson. Gordon is a professor at New St. Andrews College in Moscow, Idaho. He lives in the Pacific Northwest. He spends a great deal of time in the outside, in forests, on mountains, at the seashore, doing all kinds of just crazy things with animals and plants and whatnot. Just a lover of God's creation, a lover of God's earth. And that really reflects what God Himself says about His creation repeatedly throughout Scripture. In Psalm 19, He tells us that the heavens declare the glory of God, the firmament shows His handiwork, day unto day shows forth speech, night to night speaks. All of this is just wonderful. Psalm 24:1 says, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the sea and all that dwell therein. Psalm 115, verse 16 tells us the heaven and the highest of heavens are the Lord's, but the earth He has given to the sons of men. So there is this sort of what I call a subordinate ownership that human beings have over the earth. We are subordinate to God. We are accountable to God in how we use it. But we are to love this physical creation as God does. We are to enjoy it. We are to appreciate it. We are to take good care of it. And this is a great deal of what Dr. Wilson has dedicated his life to as a biologist and a Christian. Gordon Wilson, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank
First,
you for
please,
having me.
all right, tell us a bit of your own background. Just give us your story for 4 or 5 minutes, perhaps, and tell
Okay.
people how you got into what you do and why you love it so much.
Well, I really think what you've already mentioned that I teach at New St. Andrews College, and but if I go back to the very beginning of my interest, I grew up in Annapolis, Maryland, and there was nobody really in my family. There was nothing, no antipathy towards nature at all. But I feel like it was innate. I loved living things. One of my first memories, we lived right across the street from a woodland, and I remember I was 5 or 6, and my older brothers found a couple box turtles that they brought home, and I remember just being literally enthralled. Anything that was having to do with life. I remember vaguely remember someone had grabbed a crab out of the Chesapeake Bay, one of the creeks that flowed into the bay, brought up a crab. It might have been a blue crab. I don't remember. Um, and it was in our sandbox. And again, uh, I was just fixated on anything alive. Um, we didn't really have a TV. I don't remember watching nature documentaries until we left from there in '68 to Michigan. And then I remember watching Jacques Cousteau and Mutual of Omaha and all of those things. So I loved nature documentaries back then. Uh, I remember my dad had a book table at the Parent Teachers Association. I was I was one of the few kids that got integrated uh, in Annapolis. I think a lot of the other families just immediately popped their kids into parochial schools, and I was one of the few kids that was integrated into a predominantly black school. My dad wanted to have a book table, and he had a book on the table that was a reptile book. Um, and I remember seeing it and saying, "Dad, would you buy that for me?" Off of his own book table. And he did. Uh, Again, just those were just little. I remember catching fireflies on the edge of our woods. So it didn't have to be a particular type of animal. I loved it all. And I didn't know what biology was. I didn't know that word, but when I finally got into um, high school, life science, high school biology, I took the required and then I took the advanced biology. I knew at that time, this is my trajectory. This is what I want to do. I vaguely had this idea that I was going to be on some a glorious marine research vessel like Jacques Cousteau. But then I realized somewhere in my early college years that everything that I learned, anything that fascinated me, I wanted, I had this insatiable desire to teach. It was, uh, any willing ear. I went home and I wanted to teach my mom or dad or my sister. And because of this urge to teach, I realized, golly, maybe I should go into education with a biology major in the College of Education, which is what I did. I went from biology, letters, and science, and I switched over to the College of Education with a biology degree that was sort of um, uh, education slash biology, and it's because I wanted to teach. Um, I knew that running around on deck wouldn't be the life of a family man, a Christian family man. So I knew that education was the route that I was going to take, and so I went through um, uh, my undergraduate. Then I taught a little bit of science for 1 year. I went back into the um, a little a detour that God put me on. Worked in the ministry for a year, and then went back to grad school, or a year and a half, and then I went back to grad school in entomology. And to bring it, yeah, I'm really glad I did entomology. I love anything creeping and crawling. And then I worked in bacteriology for a year. Sorry, for 2 years, about 2.5 years in bacteriology, and then
Yeah.
I got a faculty position at Liberty University for almost
Hmm.
12 years, from 91 to 2003, and then in 2003 came back to um, my hometown, New St. Andrews, and I've been teaching here ever since for going on 19 years. So
Yeah.
this is what I love to do. Teaching's my day job, and then this Riot and the dance thing is sort of moonlighting, um,
Yeah. Right.
volunteer volunteer moonlighting.
Well, it's a wonderful film, and I want us to start taking a look at a bit of that in a minute. But first, let me just pick up on something that you just said. You referred to a year sort of in the ministry as a detour. And I think there are an awful lot of Christians who tend to think, well, let's see, if you're going to serve the Lord, it has to be in the ministry somehow.
Right,
And everything else is kind of secular on the side.
right, right,
It's not full time Christian work.
right.
Now, Martin Luther
The
kind of
Reformation took care of
blew,
that.
yeah, Martin Luther blew that idea to smithereens with his understanding of the priesthood of all believers, and that everyone's vocation is a vocation, a call from God. But pick up for us a bit on how you see your work as a biologist, and frankly, the work of many other biologists who do things quite different from what you do. How do
Hmm.
you see that as itself service to God, so that it
Hmm.
can itself be called ministry?
Yeah, very good question. I really understand what Martin Luther was after. I think I grew up thinking that ministry was that was the full time Christian work, and now I realize that no, everything has to be done as a Christian. Everything has to be done under the lordship of Jesus Christ, and um, so when I went into biology education, it couldn't just be this workaday mindset of okay, I'm supposed to teach biology. I am supposed to teach biology in such a way that it ushers my students. Um, I mean, I'm not cheesy about it. But I want them to understand that this is not just a dry body of facts. That this is proclaiming to them the artwork, the engineering of God, Him, and
Hmm.
that um, the Lord Jesus Christ, the Word, uh, all of this was created by him and through him. It says in John 1 1 through 3, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, dot, dot, dot. Uh, and all things were created through him. So when I teach, I am basically, I've said this in the documentary, I said that it is a type of theology. Theology is a study of God. And so when you study his handiwork, you are studying who God is.
God,
You're not
yeah,
necessarily studying his moral character, but you are studying his creative character by
yes.
looking at general or natural revelation. Um, so I want my students, even though we don't have biology majors here, um, we I want my students to have a deep appreciation for the diversity, the complexity of life, and to have all of um, the awe, the glory, the praise go to their Father in heaven for it, and
Yeah.
not just think of biology as this subject matter that gives me a headache.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I happen to know, because you've mentioned it to me before, that during your graduate work in biology, one of your mentors, one of your professors, uh, basically told you that as long as you were going to be thinking that way, that biology was a sort of a revelation of God's handiwork, you could never really amount to anything much. You
Yeah,
couldn't
actually, I've
you
got the
couldn't make
quote
a
here.
career. you keep it there to remind yourself,
That's
huh? And so
what.
uh, we can't see it. Just read it for us. This is what your professor
Okay,
wrote to you years ago.
um, Gordon, you'll never be able to call yourself a biologist if you continue to hold the views about evolution that you demonstrated last week. You're a bright person. Start using your own mind.
And
So,
so, what did you do? Did you use your own mind
well, what's funny, I've
and
not really
weigh
talked
the
to
arguments
him.
for evolution?
Um, what's funny and ironic about that is the reason I held that view um, was because I was using my own mind. He just assumed that because I was uh, pushing back on the narrative that they'd been trying to teach me through my whole master's degree, um, that I must be just mindlessly holding on to what what my faith told me to believe. And actually, the reason I was pushing back was because I was using my own mind. Now, he could maybe then conclude that I might not be smart, but he told me I was a bright person. Start using your own mind, because that was his only logical conclusion. If he's bright, he must not be in his own mind. But
Yeah,
no, I'm not going to give him that option. If I am bright, then I am using my own mind, and I've come to a different conclusion. Um,
yeah. It's an interesting
so
phenomenon. How so many secularists, particularly Darwinian evolutionists, uh, think about Christians, particularly Christians who are creationists, like myself. Um, about a little over a decade ago, I was in correspondence pretty frequently with a Polish physicist, one of the world's leading nuclear physicists. He was in charge of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. No, that's an American federal agency. The Atomic Energy Agency, which is an international organization. He was in charge of their investigation of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. And that was a fascinating subject. I did a lot of study on that myself and talked about it at length with him. And we had some really fun correspondence back and forth over a period of a couple of years. And one time he just mentioned in an email how foolish he thought anybody was who questioned evolution. So I wrote back to him and I said, well, I'm one who questions evolution, and yet you seem to think that I'm intelligent. Now, it seems to me that scientific method says that if you have a hypothesis that generates a prediction and your observation finds something that contradicts your prediction, you need to rethink your hypothesis. What do you think about your own hypothesis here? and, and he wrote
mhm,
back quite surprised and said, "I guess I'll have to rethink." So that was
good.
fun, but there is so much
Yeah.
prejudice against
Yeah.
um, against the Christian faith among
Right.
so many scientists, and yet there are also millions and millions of scientists who are very solid believing Christians. Uh, and I guess I wish that
Mhm.
more of them would speak up as you do and come right out and dare the other
Yeah.
side to take aim for what they're worth.
Yeah.
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 Now, Gordon, you also you haven't just done the Riot and the Dance, two actual different volumes of that, video documentaries, the Riot and the Dance Earth, which we're offering, and then later on the Riot and the Dance Water. But
Yeah.
you've also written a book, a wonderful book called A Different Shade of Green. Tell us a bit about that book, which, by the way, the Cornwall Alliance has in the past offered as one of our thank you gifts to donors, and it was very, very well received. we actually still have some copies of that available in our online store. So when you tell us about that, I hope that you'll whet the appetite of some of our users for that, and they'll go to cornwallalliance.org, click on shop, and find the book there and order a copy of it.
Yeah.
Tell us about A Different Shade of Green.
Well, yeah, just a real quick. Here it is.
There you
Um,
go.
uh, there we go.
Yep.
Um, just real brief. I don't know how brief you want, but uh, the two areas that I'm very interested in is creation evolution and also stewardship. And um, I knew that Christians were often sort of confused on that issue because the people that were making the most noise about the environment were very left or progressive um, environmentalists or alarmists, radical. And, Christians are conservative and um, often talk about the environment makes Christians nervous because they think, well, if you become interested in that, you're drifting toward the left. And I wanted to, but then you had these reactionaries that were uh, wanting to reject anything that any environmentalist held dear, um, wash my hands of that and react in a way that's um, rather than dominion minded, but domination minded, which was
Yes.
God gave us the world to use as we please, and whatever happens, happens. We don't need to concern ourselves with taking care of this great creation that God has given us. And so I wanted to steer a course that was not a scholarly slog, but a readable book that was sort of a biblical theology of how we're to view the environment. It's called,
Yeah.
the subtitle is A Biblical Approach to Environmentalism and the Dominion Mandate. And I
Yeah.
wanted it to be not so much methods, but I wanted the book to be mostly principles. How are we to view um, the creation that God gave us? And one of the main take home things, just in short, is that God made it. It says in Genesis 1:31 that God saw all that he had made and it is very good, which means that it's not open to reevaluation. And therefore, I think it's one of our very high priority to maintain the inventory that God has made, which
Yeah.
goes back to biodiversity conservation. Also, um, that when he values something, we often look for when we're trying to when environmentalists tries to preserve something, they try to find some practical or utilitarian aspect of it to try to get enough buy-in from the public. We have to preserve this plant or animal because if we don't, the ecosystem's going to implode, or we might lose the cure for cancer, or we might, there has to be some sort of practical appeal to get people to be concerned about it. And from a biblical perspective, it probably does have some kind of value that we might not know, and it's worth finding out. But that's not the the cornerstone of its value is spoken in the words of God when He says it is very good. Um,
Yeah.
that is what gives it its intrinsic value. And yes, it may or may not have practical um, value to us, but it's part of the life support system He gave us, and
Yeah.
we should
Yeah.
value it simply because He did. So
Yeah. Because
there's a
it
lot
pleases
more
him.
unpacking to do there, but that's a quick,
Yes,
more
indeed.
biblical principles on how
Yeah.
to look at the great creation that God has made us.
Yeah. Yeah,
made
you
for us.
mentioned there the conservation of this creation, this inventory that God has given us, and the very word conservation is linked to the word conserve, which is also linked to the word conservative. For a
Right.
long, long time, the proper stewardship of the natural world was largely the bailiwick of conservatives. Certainly in
Hmm.
the late 19th century, the early 20th century, people like Teddy Roosevelt,
Right.
before he
Gifford
went down a
Pinchot.
sort of a progressive trail, this was
Yeah.
a conservative value, and I think rightly
Hmm.
so. And it's so important that conservatives not take a sort of a careless attitude toward the natural order, because when they do that, one, they alienate people who really do care about it, and
Yeah.
two, they set themselves up in a pretty fragile position. One of the more popular writers today on the Christian sort of progressive end of environmental issues, evangelical environmentalism, is a fellow named Jonathan Merritt. And Jonathan actually went to Liberty University, and he tells in his own, I've forgotten now where it was that he wrote about it. It's not an autobiography, but some article somewhere that he wrote. He tells about how when he was a student at Liberty University, he and others like himself would drive down the highway, and they would have stopped at a fast food joint and gotten some food. And when they finished eating, they would just throw the paper trash out the window because, after all, it's all going to burn up. The world is going to burn up. And so we don't have to take good care of it. And later on, he felt terribly guilty for that. And he ran to the opposite extreme and began to
Right.
embrace the kinds of ideas that really are not biblical about environmental
Right.
care. And so when one goes to one extreme or the other, one really puts oneself in a fragile position. The aim
Yeah.
for the Christian is not to be moderate. It's not to, go down the middle between two
Right.
extremes. The aim for the Christian is to be biblical, whatever
Biblical.
that
Yeah.
requires. And
Yep.
I think that's very important. And I think that's exactly what you aim for so well, both in your book, A Different Shade of Green, and what you illustrate beautifully in your documentary video, a different, pardon me, the Riot and the Dance, Earth, Volume 1, Water, Volume 2. And Earth is the one that we're talking about today. Let's get on to that. And I believe
Yeah.
we are able to show a trailer from that, and then let's get into some discussion.
All right.
The Word of God is not just in black and red letters on onion skin pages. It's living and breathing in the mountains, the deserts, and the trees. If we wanted to study somebody like Michelangelo, we would want to study all of his works of art, his paintings, his sculptures. The way you get to know God is to study everything that he wrote and made.
My first comment about this, Gordon, is just simply that it is beautiful. It's stunning. It is just a tour de force, a feast for the eyes, and frankly, even sound. The musical treatment in it is quite wonderful. I just loved watching it over and over as we were first getting acquainted with it, and I was considering carrying it through the Cornwall Alliance, which we're so glad now to do. Um, Gordon, tell us, What is it that you would most want people to take away from viewing the riot and the dance?
The thing that I most want them to take away is that this is, they're so used to getting documentaries where this is just living things, and it's been attributed to chance. Now, from a Christian perspective, watching a secular documentary, they're constantly being catechized that this is just the result of time, chance, matter, and energy. Um, Now they may not believe that, but that's sort of uh, getting into their head. And what I want this to do is to give them an understanding that this is, God did not just, I mean, he did sort of bring it into existence suddenly, Genesis 1, but don't think of it as he popped it into existence as if it was a magician pulling a rabbit out of a hat. Um, God's infinite wisdom uh, actually designed it. God, down from the down to the atomic level, up to the molecular, up to the cells, the whole hairy or furry or scaly complexity. God designed it, and a lot of forms of life, when they watch something like this, they might think, well, I like the cute and fuzzy things, but I don't like those weird, scaly, many-legged things. And remember, God um, creates in many different genres, and I think if we are, I mean, I know that a lot of it's been bent by the fall, but um, God still made the creation, and he is going to redeem it. And I think a lot of things are, we just need a sort of an attitude adjustment about some things that don't quite fit um, our our categories of what is marvelous. We might
Hmm.
not think it's beautiful, but God doesn't just make beauty, he makes bizarre. He makes
Yeah,
um, fantastical. He makes humble. Um, there's just, he creates in so many different ways. And I want people to just see God's vast artwork. He works in so many different
yeah,
um, colors and genres, and but these aren't just works of art, they're living and breathing, and they
yeah,
I want people, I guess the takeaway is, I want them to see this and worship, worship God,
yeah,
that they would, as David said, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. But we, as those that look at the great outdoors, we can say that God made all of these creatures. They are fearfully and wonderfully made as well. Um,
yes,
Even if they don't conform to our our aesthetic sensibilities, like bats or snakes or millipedes, God made all of it. And the symmetry, there's beauty in the scaly, like these lizards. I love, besides the tick in the armpit of that one lizard, um, just the beauty of the wave movements. We often just kind of look at something and we don't really ponder it. Psalm 111:2, greater the works of the Lord, studied by all
yeah,
who have pleasure in them. Um, doesn't mean everybody needs to be a biologist, but so many people that are non-biologists still get into it. I really commend some kind of natural hobby, whether it's wildflowers or birds. So many people get into birding, and it's mostly just mostly just liberals in the Audubon local Audubon society. I think it would be interesting to either start our own organizations like that, or join them, provided that their mission statement is not at odds with the gospel, or that you have to vote for some liberal green candidate to join. But I think it would be pretty fun to have a very heavily liberal Audubon society be inundated by a bunch of
Yeah,
Christian, nature-loving Christians.
a great mission
That would
field,
be,
frankly. Yeah.
yeah, great
You
mission
know,
field. It's like, oh, you're a Christian. Do you love nature? Well, of
yeah,
course, my
yeah,
Lord made it.
yeah, that's right. Exactly. You know, you made reference to God making some humble things. He also made some quite magnificent things,
Like,
and
yeah,
even some of the magnificent things are pretty humble compared with other magnificent things. You know, I mean, we
right.
can think, for instance, about a humble earthworm compared with a lion. And then that lion is
Hmm.
pretty humble compared with a great blue whale. And the great blue
Exactly.
whale is pretty humbled intellectually compared with a human being. And a human being
Right.
is pretty humbled physically anyway compared
Yeah.
with the whole planet Earth. But that's humbled
Yeah.
compared with the sun. And then I just read
Yeah.
yesterday about a particular star, and it doesn't have any common sort of name. It's just a name, a combination of numbers and letters, and I don't remember now what they were. But it's a star that is some 11 million times brighter than our sun. So our sun is pretty humbled by comparison with that.
Right. Right.
And then we realize that the whole of creation is in the palm of our Father's hand. I mean, this is the
Yep.
sort of thing that really ought to move all of us
Hmm.
to awe, to reverence, to the fear of the Lord, but also to praise and to glory and to rejoicing. And I see that so much in your film, uh, the riot and the dance. I think it's quite wonderful. I also want to pick up on another comment that you made, and that was that you wish that people would appreciate not just the beautiful, but also the sort of bizarre looking.
Hmm.
And I think to myself, so many people can appreciate a well-made, and there are plenty really lousy ones, but a well-made horror movie
Hmm.
can be a real work of art, can be quite fascinating, need not be morally offensive in any way. If we can appreciate that, why can't we appreciate a rattlesnake?
Right.
Why can't
Right.
we appreciate? I know in the film you spend some time holding and telling us all about a particular type of toad that
Yeah.
you catch one of them in
In the
a
desert.
swampy
Yeah.
area, and it is covered with warts that emit a toxic gel. Tell us about that particular animal.
Well, that was actually in the Sonoran Desert. I think it was that big, slimy toad.
Ah,
This
yes.
um, the Sonoran Desert toad, and yeah, it's just a very toxic slime. I mean, it's fine with your hands. You just don't want to rub your eyes or get it, ingest any of it. Um,
Huh.
but so often we again have a certain view of what is pretty, and yes, toads aren't pretty like a butterfly or a leopard, but there's something humble and noble about its it looks like an obese monarch, just that uh, uh, they're just interesting, and I like to not compare animals. Like, it's often apples and oranges. Um,
Yeah.
uh, there's um, I just enjoy seeing that. Grabbing it was so slimy, um, and um, and
It,
highly
it frankly
toxic.
looked pretty disgusting in your hands. It really did.
Yeah, right. But
And yet,
there's
there
again,
it is,
I'm not
one
going
of
to
God's
try to.
creatures.
Yeah, one of God's creatures. It has a role. I don't think we all have to evaluate it aesthetically as much as God made it. And maybe I won't know all of the reasons, but he apparently had a good reason to make it. And that's and I think that it's fun to just look at the diversity, even if you're a
Yeah.
non-biologist. I would love to see more. Um, and I've just got a lot of kids that watched Riot and the Dance. Our production company's got a lot of mail from kids that just are have watched it way too many more times than I could probably. Um, probably memorized the script. Um, and I hope that this really propels them into a lifelong love of God's creation, but in the right
Yeah.
perspective of giving God
Yeah.
the glory. And I hope it
So,
stimulates other people. I don't want to necessarily. I mean, we want to do the best we can with the series, but if up and coming stars or up and coming nature documentary people want to glorify God and um, do their own, more
wonderful.
power to them.
Wonderful. Yeah,
It
there.
was Attenborough, there's Nat Geo, there's a lot of secular ones. Why not have a lot of Christian ones?
Absolutely. Yeah. So tell us, why the title, The Riot and the Dance?
Well, that question was asked. I named my textbook that as well, which is a very odd title. And the riot refers to the fact that um, what sin did to creation, um, the fall um, uh, resulted in the curse, and after that, it ushered in all. It wasn't just a separation of man and God. There was an antagonism that trickled down to every aspect of creation. So you have now predators. Everything was an herbivore before. So you have these adversarial relationships popping up. You have predators and prey. You have parasites and hosts. You have pathogens that cause sickness in all sorts of creatures and plants. Um, and so that's sort of what the riot is all about. Um, it's as the Roman says, it's all creation groans. It was subjected to futility by the Lord. In the context, it's subjected to futility by the Creator, who uh, caused the curse not just to fall on Adam and Eve, but all of creation. So that aspect is the riot. But as we also see in Romans 1:20, it says God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made. If you look at life, um, whether you're talking about the molecular level all the way up to the ecosystem level, there is a
Hmm.
dance. It's choreographed. You can see the glories of creation in all of it. It's a lot of it's broken because of the fall, but a lot of it is still clearly. You can still see the creation, the creator's touch, and that dance refers to at the molecular level, RNA transcription, DNA replication, the Krebs cycle, all of these biochemical pathways. If you look at the telos or the teleology of all of it, it's clearly a dance. Everything is going towards dancing towards a goal. It's not randomness. Um,
Yeah.
and if you go up to the organism level, there are dances and courtship behaviors, um, and uh, just how a hummingbird flies through the air, or the
Amazing.
murmurations of starlings in the sky. There's a dance at that organismal level. And then at the ecosystem level, there's a dance in terms of the cycles of nature, and the nitrogen cycle and
Yes.
the carbon cycle and the water cycle. Um, so there's a dance going through all levels organizational levels of life, as well as a riot that you can see. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
basically
Yeah.
the meaning behind that.
Great. Great. One of the things that I appreciated about both your book, A Different Shade of Green, and I would love to read your textbook sometime too. What was the title of that?
The riot and the dance. Yeah,
Oh,
and
I'm sorry. Yes, of
my
course.
nep
That's
my
right.
nephew
Yeah,
wanted the documentary to be the same title as
that's right. Yeah,
the book. Here's
the
the
textbook,
textbook
of course. Right.
for
Okay.
foundational
One of the things,
biology.
yeah, one of
Pardon?
the things that I really appreciated about A Different Shade of Green, and what I appreciate also about your video documentary, The Riot and the Dance, is that unlike an awful lot of evangelical writers on environmental stewardship, you take the curse very seriously. It's a rather strange thing. You can read through many different books by evangelicals on creation care and so on, and at least for about, well, from the late 1970s through the late 1990s, you would almost never even see any reference to the curse. You might see reference to the fall of man into sin, and that tended to be used as a reason to say, well, because of sin, we can't trust human stewardship of the earth anymore, and
Right.
so therefore we just need to minimize our footprint on the earth. We need
We're
to
we're we're such
preserve it. It's
rascals.
best untouched by human hand because the human hand is so sinful.
Is all
And
right.
yes, human beings can do a lot of really nasty things to the natural world, but we can
Right.
also do some really wonderful things to the natural world.
Right.
But there was an
Exactly.
almost total neglect of the curse. And even after the late 1990s, in most of the evangelical books on creation care, you'll see a few more references to the curse, but it's people handle it in a very uncomfortable way. They really don't know quite what to do with this, because what the curse tells us is that God, in judgment on human sin, actually brought considerable harm to his own good creation. And of course,
Hmm.
we shouldn't be terribly surprised at this, because after all, uh, in the lead up to the Great Flood, as human sin abounded and every thought of man's heart was only evil continuously, as God puts it in Genesis 6. Uh, in the flood, God did enormous harm to this earth. I mean,
Yeah.
talk about something that wiped out a great deal of biodiversity.
Yeah.
Nothing mankind has done has come anywhere near that. You take the curse seriously, and you really
Hmm.
seek to work into your teaching on this in the film, as well as in your textbook, and in A Different Shade of Green, how to fit the curse into our understanding of our call to exercise a godly dominion over this
Hmm.
earth. So would you for us, Gordon, just try to try to talk to us for a minute about the creation before the fall into sin, and how even before the fall, God could give Adam and Eve the instruction, subdue it, which
Hmm.
indicates that there's something about it that is not teleologically perfect. I mean, I think there's nothing wrong with it, but it is right for a purpose, as the
Right.
arena,
Well, yeah.
the stage on which man is to play out his
Yeah.
role as the
Here's
image of God. Creation before the fall, the effect of the fall itself on human stewardship, and then the effect of the curse on the creation and on what human stewardship should look like.
right. Well, that's a big question. I'll try to simplify by
Yes.
saying, well, let's say you have a perfect horse, but it's a wild horse, and God
Yeah.
says, "Okay, I want you to um, break that horse, or in a godly way, and um,
Tame.
glorify that horse in a way that that horse by itself would never attain to the speed or the ability that it could have with a well. You've seen people. I'm not a horseman of or any sort, but I've seen people do amazing things with horses and other animals that bring out a potential that was not there before. And I think that
Yeah.
a perfect creation can be enhanced and beautified by someone who is working obediently under the lordship of Jesus Christ to make it even more glorious. Now, with the
Yeah.
fall, that means the creation has been bent, has been distorted, um, as well as the person. So the only um, so in that context, that means the person has to mortify the flesh in areas that may be contrary to um, redeem redeeming creation. So he needs to um, uh, get rid of any sin that would have negative effects on creation, and um, and then he needs to combat those aspects of the fall that are, going back to the horse analogy. Now we've got broken bones. Now we've got diseases. I've got to keep my horse healthy. I'm having to combat a lot more negative things because of the fall. And so that's just a quick analogy. Um, whether it's a perfect creation taking dominion or a fallen creation taking dominion, it all has to be done under the lordship of Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate so much how you have handled that, and it's just it's beautiful in the film and highly instructive. Um, in making a film like this, going to the various different places you went to around the world, handling the various different animals, reptiles, birds, uh, slugs, just amazing things. Uh, what did you find the most surprising of all? And was there anything that really, at least for a moment anyway, frightened you?
Well, as far as surprise, when we were um, actually just looking for critters outside of our hotel in Tucson, there I could probably come up with other examples, but this really surprised me. I'd only seen thread snakes in books, textbooks. And when you're a herpetologist and you get to see some tiny little snake that is, the diameter is like a worm or smaller, and it has a blunt little head um, with this tiny little, almost functionless eyes. Uh, and it was working its way through the little grid pattern of the golf cart paths. There's a grid print, sort of a square inch grid print into the golf cart path, and the thread snake was working its way, um, following these little canals between the little squares. And I picked it up, and I was just, you know, everybody else was sort of caught up in my enthusiasm because I've got a thread snake. Other people have seen thread snakes if they've lived in the area, and anytime you see something that you're not familiar with, it's special. Somebody who
Yeah,
came from another country might think a robin is special. They've never seen a
yeah.
robin. But for me, that was just a surprise. Not that
Hmm.
I knew was there. I knew it lived in the Southwest, but it was just a surprise to actually see one not in a textbook. Um, the thing that was probably the most frightening, this is more an episode water, was when we did
Okay.
um, snorkeling off of the north shore of Oahu in
Hmm.
being circled by about 20 to 30 sharks. Um, Without a cage. and we would
Hmm.
go in with our fins and our mask and nothing else. Well, our bathing suit, and we were being we were being circled by Galapagos sharks and sandbar sharks. These were, they're not man eaters, but there have been incidences with Galapagos sharks, and these were from 5 to 8 feet long uh, sharks, and they were coming awfully close, and we had to keep our eyes constantly
Yeah.
on them to show our dominance. And if you watch
Yeah.
Water, I talk a little bit about. Um, uh, it was speculative, but our our image of God, we are imago Dei, and I think um, it says there will be a reckoning for any animal that takes the lifeblood of man, and so whether you call it sin or not, there is a reckoning, and I'll leave that undefined.
Mhm.
But I feel
Yeah.
like even sharks and dumb beasts, there are some animals that step over the line and take our lives, whether it's a grizzly bear or polar bear or a great white shark or a tiger shark. But for the most part, it seems like these sharks um, know who we are,
Yeah.
and they don't step over that line. And some
I did.
do. I'm not denying that, but uh,
Yeah.
we'll leave it at that.
I
There's a
did some.
reckoning.
I did some scuba diving as a teenager, taught by a former Navy SEAL, and I, I recall. I think probably the thing that frightened me more than anything else. I got circled by sharks from time to time, but they were never really threatening. But one time I was along a reef and I reached in to pick up an abalone that I could see. And as I reached in, a moray eel came out from a cave and
Oh
just
wow!
was within an inch of my arm. And
Oh wow!
that was pretty doggone frightening. those,
Yes,
those
I
are pretty
bet.
nasty creatures. Yeah. Well, uh, what would you say, Gordon, to a skeptic who doesn't believe in a creator? Uh,
Well, in short, I mean
how
that's a
could
very
your
big.
film help?
Well, it can get into a very deep discussion, but to put it simply, I would just say that uh, without getting too technical, uh, I would say that if you know that something like an iPhone has to be designed and manufactured by very intelligent um, human beings, uh, at least the design part, uh, and yet the iPhone, we're just amazed at the iPhone being in incredibly complex. I mean, the um, incredibly complex um, black box that it is. It's doing all sorts of amazing things, and um, uh, we are. And yet, the simplest living creature or plant is orders of magnitude more complex. You can't have an
Yes.
iPhone actually, um, uh, the iPhone cannot eat uh, iron ore and make little iPhones. Um, uh, and yet, living things have the complexity to do that. It can take raw material, munch it up, and then create more of ourselves, grow ourselves up, and then uh, take all this raw material and turn it into more people, or more
Yeah.
slugs, or more snails, or more birds. This is a complexity that is mind boggling. And biologists, I think, are just so uh, they are so entrenched, they're so gripped by this naturalism and natural selection. um, it's a thing, but it selects, it doesn't create mutation.
Right.
Sort of dwindles information, it does not create de novo new information. And you can go back and forth on that, but that's what I would say in short. I want people to be hit by the complexity and not just assume the Darwinian explanations can account for
Yeah.
the complexity there. And
Yeah.
ultimately, God has to open the eyes. But once the eyes are open, it's sort of a no-brainer. It's like, duh, of course it's created.
Yeah. Very good. Well, Gordon, thank you again so much for joining us tonight, this second time on the program with me. Thank you.
Thank you very much
Do
for
you have
having
some
me.
closing comments for us?
No, I uh, other than I hope you enjoy the show and hope
Great.
you enjoy not only the earth but also water when that's made. I mean, you can get it through classical conversations, but hopefully you'll just watch the series as we make it more
Yeah.
episodic in the future.
Right. Well, thank you again, Gordon, so very, very much. Uh, it's been great having you on the show, and I look forward to just getting to know each other a whole lot better. If I'm ever up in the Pacific
Yes,
Northwest again, I hope to look you up. If you're ever
yes,
in Western Tennessee, I hope you'll look me up, and we'll
yep,
have some good fun together. Maybe you can
good,
teach me to fish better than I do.
right.
Great. Well,
All
folks,
right.
thanks again for joining us this evening. Next week on From the Stack, our topic will be twisting the truth about twisters, climate change and the great tornado outbreak. As if on cue, mainstream media jumped at the chance to blame the recent outbreak of tornadoes, especially the one that devastated so much of Mayfield, Kentucky, on climate change or global warming. Common was the claim that a warmer world means a world with more and stronger tornadoes. Ecologist Dr. Jim Steele, author of the book Landscapes and Cycles, An Environmentalist's Journey to Climate Skepticism, decimates that claim in a recent short video. He and I will discuss the tornadoes, their real cause, the media's twisting of science related to them, and his book, as well as his video on tornadoes, on next week's program. So join us then on either Facebook and YouTube, and please invite your friends to join you as well. Here's a reminder throughout the month of December, as our way of saying thank you when you make a donation, 100% tax deductible donation of literally any size to the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. We would be delighted to send you a free copy of the DVD, The Riot and the Dance, Earth, which has been our conversation topic this evening. To request your copy of The Riot and the Dance, Earth, simply go to cornwallalliance.org. That's cornwallalliance.org. Click on the donate button. And as you fill out the donation form, when you come to the comments field, just write in promo code 21-12. That's promo code 21-12, or the title, The Riot and the Dance, and we will be delighted to send you a free copy. Now, thank you again for joining us. Hope to see you next week. Merry Christmas and God bless.